Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be carrying on with my Working in Publishing series and doing my publishing Q&A. So for those of you who are newer to this channel, I work in publishing. I have been working in publishing for 3.5 years and I work in editorial. I'm an assistant editor at a fiction publishing house. And on my channel I have been doing a little series on working in publishing. I will link the playlist down below, and I've talked about kind of my experience in publishing and different departments and areas of publishing, but I also said that I would do a Q&A about working in publishing, so some of you have given me some questions which I'm going to answer today. If you have any other questions which you would like to ask about working in publishing and the UK publishing industry in general, do leave your comments down below and I will try and answer them in the comments as well. So I tried to order these in like a vaguely thematic / related questions way. We'll see how that goes. Alison Ong asks, does your job involve working long hours? If you work in publishing, you're probably not going to be leaving at 5:30 on the dot every single day because there's always a lot of work to do, but you're also not going to be in the office until really late at night. In general, I would say publishing is quite balanced, and I like working in publishing for it being something where I have a challenge and I'm like committed to my work and have lots of stuff to do, but also that I'm not in the office till really late at night. I do think it's worth being aware that there are certain areas of publishing where you might be expected to work more out of usual office hours or to do more, sort of to take more work home from you. If you work in publicity and publishing, you will be expected to do events, sometimes on weekends or in evenings, and if you work in editorial, especially in fiction, you should expect to take reading work home with you, which is not the same as like taking all your emails home with you and being on email constantly, but you should expect to be reading books for work outside of your office hours, because nobody has time to do all the reading they have to do while they're actually in the office. Then Susanna C asks, do you like all of the books that you work on now? Do you think it is important to like the book if you are editing it? If you don't like the book, does it affect you? And similarly, Loretta Reb asks, I would like to know how working in publishing has affected your personal reading habits. Since you have to read so much for work, does that change how much you read, how you feel towards, or which books you read for pleasure? Is required reading for work as painful as in school? So, lots of things to talk about there. One, I never found required reading very painful in school. I'm someone who enjoys being set things to read, which is probably one of the reasons why I like working in publishing. I'm quite lucky in that I'm quite a broad and varied reader and I like a lot of different kind of books. In general, because I am someone who enjoys books and because I enjoy editing and kind of working on books, I would probably find something to enjoy about any book that I was working on. But I think there are certain areas and certain genres that I wouldn't want to work in because I think I wouldn't enjoy doing reading for those, such as crime and horror. And possibly really experimental literary fiction. I don't know, maybe I would enjoy that, but I also think editing that is a kind of completely different ballgame. In the same way that I don't think I could ever edit poetry, it's just something quite different. So I personally do think it is important to like a book that you're editing, or at least to understand the book that you're editing. I don't think you have to like love everything about it and to be like, this is exactly the kind of thing that I read. Not everything I work on at work is exactly the kind of thing that I read. But I think it's important if you're editing, especially if you're doing like a structural or line edit, which is some of what I do, but a lot of what I do is desk editing, which I don't think you really have to like a book to do well, necessarily. But I think if you're doing a bigger structural or line edit, I think you do have to at least understand the book that you're working on, because if you don't like it and you don't kind of get anything out of it, you're not going to edit it well. Like I said, I'm lucky that all of the books that we do where I work, I enjoy. Some of them are more the kind of things that I would pick up on my own, some of them are not, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy them. And I do really like everything that I read for work, which is lucky. And like I said, I never found required reading painful in school, and I certainly don't find it painful now. So yeah, I think it is important to like, or at least to understand, books that you're working on. I think it helps that I like all the books I'm working on. It means I enjoy my job a lot more. I have worked on non-fiction books in the past that I didn't like enjoy. Like I've worked on cookbooks and so on, and I'm not like, I don't really enjoy working on cookbooks, and I don't, like I do follow recipes sometimes, but I don't really use cookbooks very much. And I could still work on them, but I think it helps when you work in publishing if you like the books that you're working on, especially in editorial. In terms of how it has affected like my reading for pleasure, I think it has made the way I read for pleasure slightly different, in that I'm probably more aware of certain things than I used to be. And I do sometimes catch myself in the middle of a novel I'm reading for fun and thinking about how I could editorially improve it, and then being like, no, this book's published now, I don't get to do that here. But in general, I love reading, and I work in publishing because I love reading, and I read a lot because I love reading. And the fact that I work in publishing doesn't change the fact that I love reading. Like, I still read a lot in my spare time. I almost thought when I started working in fiction that I might not read as much in my spare time because I had to read a lot for work. But actually I find I read just as much, if not even more, in my spare time, because there's so many things at work that are really exciting and remind me why I like reading, so I just want to read all the time, and even more in my spare time. And also there's lots of books I want to read which are like not books I'm working on but are relevant to the field and the area which I work in, so there's that as well. But also because I'm reading lots of work that is all contemporary, it means I miss classics, so then I want to read more classics. So actually I would say that yeah, I love reading for pleasure as much as I ever have done, and I might read slightly differently than I used to before I worked in publishing, but I read more and I enjoy reading even more than I ever used to. Alison Ong asks, does your job require you to verify facts or data presented in a book by doing your own research? So sort of. When I worked in non-fiction, I did have to do quite a lot of like research and fact checking, which I used to enjoy. In fiction, there's like less of that because I'm dealing less with facts, but obviously sometimes you might find a historical inaccuracy, for example, in a book that you're working on, and you might want to go and look that up and check it. And often that is something that a copy editor does. I usually brief the copy editor, so when I've read the book, if there's anything I think which I'm like, I'm not completely certain if that's historically accurate, I might check it myself and flag it with the author myself, or I might ask the copy editor to look into it. So yeah, I guess like there is verifying of facts involved, but that's not like a huge part of my job. Kevin Varney asks, what do you do if you spot a continuity mistake, for example, sort of between books in a series? So this can definitely happen, and I do understand why it happens. Sometimes an author will forget that they've done something in another book. In the area where I work, because I work in sort of women's and general fiction, it's very rare that I work on series that are more than a couple of books long. We do have quite a few books that are in series, but they're not in general very long series. So for example, I recently worked on Wild Women by Louise Penton. This was the third book in the series. I read the previous two books before starting work on this book in this series. My line manager who was editing this book had worked on the two books previous in this series, and then like all of the freelancers who are involved, copy editor and proofreader, some of them I think had worked on the book previously, and then we got them to read or reread the previous two books in the series, so that the author and like 4 people in editorial were checking for continuity things, I suppose. So there will be a lot of like systems in place to catch continuity things. But if an author is borrowing a character from another book but it's not a strict series, or if it's an author who has a really, really long and well-established series, for example in crime you often get a series that are like 20 books long, I don't know that they would get a proofreader to read every single book previous in that series to check for continuity errors. I feel like that would be quite a lot of money to ask a proofreader to do that, and even if you get the same proofreader to proofread like every single book in the series, one of the series is over 20 years long, that's probably not going to happen, and also they won't remember it either. So I think continuity errors can happen, and obviously there's lots of systems to avoid them, like any mistakes in books, but these things can happen. And if someone in the editorial team was to spot that in the editorial process, they would flag it to the author and the author would correct it if possible. Alison Ong asks, does your job involve meeting with authors? Yes, it does. I have met the majority of the authors that I work with and had meetings with them. Some of them I haven't if they live abroad, but authors come into the office for meetings. Usually like in the acquisition process for a book, we'd like meet the author and tell them about ourselves. They then might come in for an editorial chat, depending on the kind of level of work that's needed on the book, or like have phone calls or Skype sessions, depending on how far away from London, where the office is based, they are. We also often have meetings for like marketing and publicity updates and things like that. So yeah, our authors do come into the office, and I have met most of them and had meetings with them, or like been present in meetings with them. So yes, that is a part of my job. The Awesome Project asks, is it the publishers who create the celebrity book clubs, such as Reese Witherspoon's or Emma Watson's, or do the publishers sell the books for them to endorse? So I don't entirely know. I don't have that much experience with all of these, and I think they operate differently. For a lot of celebrity or otherwise book clubs, even things like the Radio 2 book club, publishers submit books to the book club. So they're not selling them, but they are like submitting them and saying, why don't you look at this one? And then the book club organisation, or whoever in the organisation picks, will select books to feature in that book club. That is usually how it works, but like I said, I don't know how it works for everything, and I mean, Reese Witherspoon is in the US, so I have no idea how that would work. It might be very different there. Alison Ong asks, I'd like to know whether working in publishing requires any certificate in publishing or IT or computer content management or anything like that. Based on your experience, is it a career where you can just learn from mentors along the way, or where professional qualifications in publishing count more? And similarly, Alexandra Davidovich asks, I'd like to know what kind of education qualifies someone to apply for some of these jobs. And Karen Beth Stovus asks, what kind of educational training do people need for different sectors in publishing? I would say that publishing is an industry where professional qualifications don't count for that much, and it's much more about your actual experience in the field. Certainly some people who work in publishing have publishing masters. I know a few people who have masters in publishing, but not very many. They are definitely in the minority. I think doing a publishing masters can give you lots of extra experience and knowledge and can show to potential employers that you're keen, but it's definitely not a necessity at all. I do not have a publishing masters or any qualifications in publishing. I do have a degree in English Literature and History and a master's in creative writing, which I suppose are things that are related to publishing, but I also know people who work in publishing who have degrees in languages or criminology or anything. Like, people come from all kinds of different backgrounds and people don't have any specific qualifications. Similarly, you don't need any kind of qualifications in any particular IT or computer skills. I think the only area in publishing where you probably need a specific qualification would be design, where the majority of people who are book designers do have a book design qualification of some kind. One thing I would say though is I think in general, pretty much everyone who works in publishing has a university degree. It can be in lots of different things, but I don't know anyone who works in publishing who doesn't have a university degree, and I think in general that is a requirement for working in publishing. I think there are some publishing houses who say it is not a requirement when people apply to jobs, but I think it would be quite rare and very lucky, and you'd have to have a lot of other things to show to get into publishing without having a degree, certainly like if you're at my life stage, rather than having worked in publishing for a long time. Then Dorothea Castellan asks, do you know many people or know of some people who are not from the UK but still working in publishing in the UK? Is that even possible? Yes, that is absolutely possible. I know a lot of people who work in publishing who are not from the UK. The UK publishing industry is really open to a lot of people from around the world, and a lot of people from around the world do work in publishing. At one point I even worked, the first company I worked at, there was one point where out of the 10 of us who worked there, I think it was only me and the director who were people who were born in the UK, and everyone else was from elsewhere, partly because that was quite an international publisher, kind of focusing on an international market. But everywhere else I have worked as well, there has been a lot of people who are not from the UK. I would say there are probably certain areas where that is more the case or less the case. Foreign rights as a department is a department where it's very useful if you work in it to have multiple languages and be able to speak multiple languages, and in the UK we're not very good at teaching people to speak multiple languages, so therefore a lot of people who work in foreign rights are not from the UK. However, I would say that in editorial, I think you would be at a disadvantage if English wasn't your first language, because it's so, like, even if you are completely fluent conversationally, in terms of the way you write and the way you edit fiction, it might be slightly different. So I don't think I know anybody who works in editorial who is not from an English language speaking country, though I do know plenty of people who work in editorial in the UK who are from New Zealand or Australia or Canada or the US or the Republic of Ireland. But I don't think I know anyone who is from a different European country who works in editorial, though I know plenty of people from different European countries who work in foreign rights or production or publicity or marketing or sales or, yeah, anywhere really. Alison Ong asks, does your job involve meeting or liaising with booksellers on the best way to market a book? No, that is definitely not part of my job, and that's definitely not an editorial thing. It's sort of part of the job of sales, but I would say that marketing and sales are slightly separate, though they are connected. So sales as a department meet with booksellers and retailers and talk to them about the books. And sometimes retailers and booksellers will comment on sort of cover design and general direction and marketing approach and kind of positioning within the market. But often, like, the marketing is slightly separate from that. To be honest, that's an area I don't know masses about because it's definitely not part of my job. Madeline from Maids with Books asks, I know these are not the field you work in, but if you can, I'd be curious to hear more about e-publishing, foreign licensing and author event organisation. So yes, those are not areas that I know that much about, apart from e-publishing, I suppose, because that's like tangentially related to editorial. I do create ebooks or brief typesetters to create ebooks, which then get put up. So I know a bit about e-publishing, but not that much. Everything that we publish where I work goes into ebook. A lot of things also go into audiobook, which is often digital as well now. And we work very closely with Amazon and Kobo and other retailers to distribute ebooks. Yeah, I don't think that I have that much more to say about e-publishing. If you have any more specific questions, Madeline, though, do leave your comments down below and I can answer them. But yeah, foreign licensing or foreign rights is also a big part of a lot of publishers where I have worked, in terms of selling translation rights to different publishers abroad and those books being translated. In terms of author event organisation, again, not something I'm massively involved in, but in general the publicity department handle that, and they work with bookshops or other places to organise events, and often author events will be organised like around the publication of a book and try and like take an author on book tour to go to lots of different venues if that's possible and feasible. Caitlin from Books for MK asked, do you think that publishers around the world, specifically in the USA, function in basically the same way as you are describing in the UK? I imagine there would be small differences, but is it probably the same basic process and types of editing roles for employees? So yes, I would say it probably is in the US and in English language speaking publishing houses around the world. I don't know in terms of non-English language speaking. I think a lot of it operates in the same way to my knowledge, and I have been in publishers where we're selling books to various different countries and things seem to operate in the same way, but because I've never worked in publishing in another country I don't completely know. I do know people who work in publishing in the UK who have previously worked in publishing in different countries who say that things are quite similar. I imagine the departments and kind of role are quite similar, but I'm sure there will be some differences in terms of how things are done. The Awesome Podcast asks, when selling international rights, is it common for booksellers to be transported to other countries, or is it mostly done through phone and Skype calls? All of our like international sales people and some of our foreign rights people do go on trips abroad to various countries to sell rights. They also go to book fairs, so there were quite a few book fairs held throughout the year. The two main ones are London Book Fair and Frankfurt Book Fair, where various publishers and rights people and agencies from all around the world get together in London in sort of April, March time, and Frankfurt in October time, and try and sell each other books and the rights to books. So that's where a lot of deals are done in terms of selling international rights, is at those book fairs. There are lots of other ones as well. Those are just two of the major ones. And there's like Bologna Book Fair is the like biggest children's one, which takes place in the spring as well, I think. But yeah, those three are big book fairs that lots of selling is done at, but also salespeople, both international sales and foreign rights, do take sales trips to other countries to discuss and pitch and sell books, but also things are done through email, I would say, much more than phone and Skype calls. Yeah, email and sales trips and book fairs are the main ways I would say international rights are sold. And the final question of the Q&A, the Awesome Project asks, is YA usually made by children or adult publishing houses? YA is always made by children's publishing houses. YA is definitely a part of children's. And in general, I would say there are some separate YA publishers, but in general, YA is part of the children's division entirely. And when I'm talking about publishing, I say children's or children's fiction, I'm including YA in that because it is included in that within the industry. Partly because like the particular differences of marketing books to children and to teenagers are the same. A lot of the issues around like marketing and publicity and how it's slightly different to market to younger people is kind of quite similar between children and YA, and in terms of the editorial process and particularly like skills and audience awareness and language barriers, like yeah, YA is part of children's publishing. And yeah, I think that's all. Do let me know down in the comments if you have any other questions about working in publishing, and I will do my best to answer them. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.